January 15th, 2009. It was supposed to be another ordinary winter afternoon in New York City. Millions of people filled the streets below. Cars moved through Manhattan traffic. Ferries crossed the Hudson River. Airplanes took off every few minutes from nearby airports. Nobody knew that in just moments. An aircraft carrying 155 people would lose all engine power above one of the most crowded cities on Earth. And somehow, every single person on board would survive. This is the story of U.S. Airways Flight 1549, the flight the world would later call the Miracle on the Hudson. New York City is one of the busiest aviation environments in the world. Every single day, thousands of aircraft move through the skies above the city. Pilots flying into or out of New York airports operate in extremely crowded airspace with very little room for error. LaGuardia Airport, where Flight 1549 departed from, is especially difficult. Surrounded by water and dense urban areas, pilots have limited options during emergencies. On January 15th, the weather conditions were cold but manageable. Visibility was good. The skies were mostly clear. Everything seemed normal. Inside the terminal, passengers boarded U.S. Airways Flight 1549. Some were business travelers. Others were families returning home. Some simply wanted to sleep through the short flight to Charlotte, North Carolina. Nobody expected their lives were about to change forever. At the front of the aircraft sat Captain Chesley, Sully Sullenberger. To many people, Sully would later become a hero. But before that day, he was already one of the most experienced pilots in commercial aviation. Sully had spent decades flying aircraft. He previously served as a fighter pilot in the United States Air Force. He studied aviation safety extensively and was known for his calm personality and disciplined flying style. By 2009, he had accumulated over 19,000 hours of flight experience. His co-pilot, Jeffrey Skiles, was also highly trained. Ironically, Skiles had very little experience flying the Airbus A320 specifically, but his overall aviation background was strong. Together, the two pilots formed a capable and professional crew. The flight attendants on board also had years of experience handling emergencies and passenger safety. That training would soon become critical. At 3:24 p.m., Flight 1549 pushed away from the gate. The Airbus A320 taxied toward the runway. Passengers settled into their seats. Some looked out the windows at the New York skyline. Others listened to music or checked their phones one final time before departure. Then the aircraft accelerated down the runway. Within seconds, the plane lifted into the cold winter sky. At first, everything felt routine. The aircraft climbed normally. The engine sounded smooth. The flight crew began preparing for standard operations. But just 90 seconds later, everything changed. As the aircraft climbed through approximately 3,000 feet, the pilots suddenly saw something ahead, a flock of large Canada geese. There was almost no time to react. The birds slammed directly into the aircraft. Passengers heard loud bangs. Inside the cockpit, Sully later described the sound as deeply disturbing. Almost instantly, both engines suffered catastrophic damage. Flames burst from the engines. The aircraft began losing thrust rapidly. Then came one of the most terrifying moments possible aboard an airplane. Silence. Commercial jet engines are normally loud and powerful, but now the cabin became eerily quiet. Passengers immediately sensed something was wrong. Some looked outside and saw flames. Others noticed the aircraft no longer climbing. Inside the cockpit, warning systems activated everywhere. The aircraft had lost both engines. A situation so rare that many pilots never experience it, even in simulations. At that moment, Sully understood the reality of the situation. The plane was no longer truly flying. It was gliding, and at low altitude over New York City, they had almost no time. Investigators later estimated the crew had roughly 3.5 minutes to save everyone on board. Air traffic controllers quickly offered nearby airports, but Sully analyzed the aircraft's altitude, speed, and distance. Returning to LaGuardia was unlikely. Attempting another airport could end in disaster, and below them stood millions of people. The aircraft could not simply fall into the city. Sully needed another option. Then he looked toward the Hudson River, wide, straight, and free of buildings. It was the only possible landing area, but no large commercial jet had ever successfully performed an emergency water landing under those exact conditions. There was no guarantee the aircraft would stay intact. No guarantee the wings wouldn't tear off. No guarantee passengers would survive the impact. Still, Sully committed to the decision. "We're going to be in the Hudson." Inside the cabin, flight attendants began shouting commands. "Brace for impact." Passengers lowered their heads. Some prayed. Some cried. Others froze completely in fear. Several passengers later said they believed they were about to die. One passenger texted loved ones goodbye messages. Another remembered staring at the skyline, thinking they would crash into buildings. Meanwhile, inside the cockpit, Sully remained remarkably calm. His focus narrowed entirely onto controlling the aircraft. Without engine power, every movement mattered. Too fast, and the aircraft could break apart violently on impact. Too slow, and the plane could stall before reaching the river. The aircraft descended rapidly toward the Hudson. Cars moved along highways below, completely unaware. People walking through Manhattan looked up in confusion as the massive Airbus flew unusually low over the city. Some witnesses later said the plane appeared almost silent, like it was floating. At approximately 3:31 p.m., Flight 1549 touched the surface of the Hudson River. The impact was enormous. Water exploded around the aircraft. The fuselage slammed against the river at high speed. Passengers were thrown violently forward, but somehow, the aircraft remained intact. It did not flip over. It did not break apart. Sully had accomplished the impossible, but the danger was far from over. The aircraft immediately began taking on freezing water, and outside, the river temperature was brutally cold. Passengers evacuated quickly onto the wings and inflatable rafts. Some stood directly in icy water. Others struggled to maintain balance on the slippery aircraft surface. Inside the cabin, flight attendants continued helping passengers escape despite the chaos. Meanwhile, witnesses across New York watched in disbelief. An airliner was floating in the Hudson River. Nearby ferry captains reacted almost immediately. Without hesitation, multiple ferries changed course and rushed toward the sinking aircraft. Their response became one of the most important parts of the survival story. Within minutes, rescue boats surrounded the plane. Passengers were pulled aboard one after another. Many suffered from shock and cold exposure, but they were alive. Every single person on board survived. 155 souls saved. As passengers evacuated, Sully did something extraordinary. Instead of escaping immediately, he walked through the sinking aircraft twice. He checked every row, every seat, every section of the cabin. He refused to leave until he was certain nobody remained on board. Only then did he finally evacuate. That moment would later define him in the eyes of many people around the world, not just as a skilled pilot, but as a leader willing to stay until everyone else was safe. In the days following the accident, investigators began examining every detail. The bird strike had destroyed both engines almost instantly. The Canada geese involved were large enough to cause catastrophic engine failure. Investigators also analyzed whether Sully could have returned to an airport instead of landing in the river. Computer simulations initially suggested it might have been possible. But there was one major problem. The simulations assumed perfect reaction times. Real human beings do not react instantly. When investigators added realistic human decision-making delays, most simulation attempts ended in crashes. Some aircraft failed before reaching the runway. Others crashed into urban areas. The conclusion became clear. Landing in the Hudson River was likely the only decision that could have saved everyone on board. The miracle on the Hudson became more than just an aviation story. It became a story about leadership under pressure, preparation, training, calmness during chaos. Sully later explained that every lesson from his entire career contributed to those few critical minutes. Every hour of training, every emergency procedure, every flight, all of it mattered. The event also highlighted the professionalism of flight attendants, air traffic controllers, ferry operators, and emergency responders. The survival of all 155 people was not luck alone. It was teamwork. U.S. Airways Flight 1549 should have become one of the deadliest aviation disasters in American history. Instead, it became one of the greatest survival stories ever recorded. An aircraft with no engines, a freezing river, a city below, and only minutes to decide. Yet somehow, 155 people survived. And to this day, the world still remembers the name, The Miracle on the Hudson. If you enjoyed this aviation documentary, subscribe to Sky Aviation Files for more real aviation stories every week. And let me know in the comments, What aviation story should we cover next?